I spent really almost 40 years believing saying yes to whatever people asked me to do was me just being kind or virtuously selfless. Then I discovered saying yes masked a deeper problem, a cold, insensitive selfishness living in me, and that realization changed everything about how I now choose what I agree to do. In this video, I'll show you the exact psychological studies that explain why I was driven to say yes to every request, no matter how busy or fatigued I already was, why I felt bad saying no to anyone. I'll also share what I did to fix this problem so I could finally stop feeling like I was being selfish by saying no, and when I actually say no to friends now. But first, here's what kept happening to me. Well, it still happens, but I like to think my response is different now. It's still a temptation for me. Anytime someone asks me to come over, help out, or they say, we should hang out sometime, I still get hit with a sort of instant knee-jerk guilty feeling. Guilty? I immediately start to feel bad if I don't really want to say yes. Or I may want to say yes, but I feel reluctant and unsure of committing to hanging out for some reason. Well, I know the reason why now, but we'll get to that in a second. Then, in that same instant, them staring at me with a big, grinning, extroverted smile waiting for me to reply, I'll feel a flash of shame for even wanting to say no, a sense of being trapped, small, embarrassed, as if they can see right through me, that I'm even thinking of saying no. My hands get fidgety, I rub them together. Eye contact becomes harder to pull off. My heart and gut get sort of shaky, if you can call it that. None of this is extreme, but it's the subtle cocktail of emotions and body sensations I feel when someone just asks me to hang out. All of this happens in milliseconds, but it seems like the clock completely stops. I feel overwhelmed, really. I feel fear, obligation, and guilt. But why? Why do we do what we do, right? Does everyone feel this way, or is it really just me? I can't even count how many times I've asked myself this question. Well, according to the research done by Nieuwenhoven and Megank, there's a reason for all this behavior. In their 2020 study of 3 adults who faced adverse childhood experiences, these psychologists found that they tend to have a certain inability to express desires and emotions to avoid anticipated negative, rejecting reactions from others. Here's what no one told me. Finding it difficult to say no to people isn't a virtue. I'm not a nice guy because I feel compelled to say yes to every request. What's really going on then? Nieuwenhoven and Megank go on. What stands out in all 3 cases is how they feared their parents and tried to avoid confrontation by taking up a passive position toward them and showing a reluctance to express themselves. Each of these 3 adults expressed remembering feeling angry, but unable to express that anger in those moments of fear. Yeah, that. I know the feeling well. A sense of being completely small and overpowered. A sort of terror and helplessness overtakes you when the adults that were supposed to be protecting you are the ones terrifying you. In that moment, you want to assert yourself, fight back, but you've learned that to do so would mean greater danger, greater aggression, or abuse toward you. So, you just swallow it. You swallow your power. You swallow your innate fight response. You say nothing. You nod in agreement. You survive, once and for all. This is a big problem for emotional development. These adverse childhood experiences place a fork in the road and make survival mechanisms dominate over free play and growth. From that moment, I stopped developing with courage. I developed driven by fear. Aristotle says about any person pursuing the path of virtue that the high-minded man must care more for the truth than for what people think. He's saying we need to honor reality with courage and not be driven by our fears. For the traumatized child, pursuing the path of virtue becomes seriously difficult. The inability to say no is a form of people-pleasing. Having poor boundaries arises from the same fears as people-pleasing. Very closely related to is what the ancient church calls man-pleasing. It's a form of people-pleasing. St. Mark the ascetic says, Oh, how concealed and unnoticed is the passion of man-pleasing. It overcomes and deceives even the wise. The actions of other passions are easily noticed by those who commit them, and thus, in the end, they lead those who suffer from them to weeping and deep humility. But people-pleasing hides itself with flattering words and with an appearance of piety, and therefore those who suffer from it find it very difficult to recognize its many forms and changes. What I thought was just me being a nice guy, always smiling, nodding in agreement, was really just blindness. I couldn't see myself. I hadn't yet discovered the wounded child inside me. I hadn't yet even begun to live an authentic life. This explains so much about why I couldn't say no, and why even still choosing to say no to something is still a mild trigger. Once I understood that my guilt response to standing up for myself, or to choosing self-care, or to prioritize my own needs at times, was really just a trauma response, everything changed. Within the space of about a year, I went from being someone who couldn't say no to someone who consciously chose to say yes. Through prayer, study, and loads of therapy and EMDR, I began to process those early childhood traumas in myself. I stopped being afraid to re-feel those same experiences of terror. I learned to internally recognize the core beliefs living inside me that were created by these experiences, and I learned how to rewrite those beliefs. When I began to do the work, my automatic people-pleasing reaction effortlessly disappeared. The core wounds that drove those behaviors were healing, so the symptoms disappeared. Changing my behavior wasn't difficult. It was actually effortless. My entire self began to transform, and I now live a much more honest and authentic life. This psychological hack not only affected my emotional and psychological life, but I noticed it directly affected my spiritual life. Doing the work of processing these wounds brought me one step closer to being the authentically virtuous person I live my life trying to be. Now, I'm obviously no saint, far from it, but this small piece of me is healing, and seeing that growth shows me that we're not just creatures enslaved to patterns and habits we can't see. We can actually make changes to our character. And when we change our character, personality automatically changes, and we notice the less desirable behaviors we have begin to change too. Now, when someone asks me to hang out, I may feel a slight twinge of guilt in that moment, but I can acknowledge it in myself. I can smile, look them in the eye, mentally read my calendar, my interests, and my true desire, and I can tell them with full confidence, no, I can't come by that day.